Good morning, and thank you, Panos, and thank you to the organizers for inviting SIPRI and the GICHD to present on their joint research that we kicked off in 2014. And it is for this very reason that the next 30 minutes or so will actually be split between speakers from the two entities, so my colleague Yeonju Jung from SIPRI and myself. Why did we start this project, I think, in the first place? And I think before 2014, evidence on AVM impact was kind of scattered. It was incomplete for many years. And it is also true, as Michael said, I think much less attention was paid to the issue of anti-vehicle mines, for example, as compared to anti-personal mines. And let us also remind ourselves from the beginning of quite an important difference between these two devices. While anti-personal mines were actually outlawed by the Anti-Personal Mine Ban Convention in 1997, anti-vehicle mines are currently not a prohibited weapon. Only a few specific legal provisions actually regulate the use of anti-vehicle mines, obviously beyond the more general rules of international humanitarian law and customary law. And in response to this constellation, our project has, since its inception, actually aimed to shed more systematic light on the impact of AVMs and also increase the understanding of those impacts. And this with a view actually to informing, with field-based evidence, the political discussions among states on how possibly to better mitigate the effects of anti-vehicle mines on civilians. And this process has been ongoing at the United Nations since 2001, roughly. So it's kind of a long-term endeavor, almost. At the request of states, this project has led to several kind of policy-targeted knowledge products. And it started in 2014 with kind of an initial study into the topic, both from a humanitarian and also a bit development perspective. And then subsequently, we issued annual reports on data that we were collecting on anti-vehicle mine incidents and casualties. And there will be a report on 2018 planned to be released actually in June. We have a few copies as well here if you're interested. So today we, sorry, I haven't found the right one. So today we will mainly address the humanitarian consequences of anti-vehicle mine contamination, departing actually from our casualty and incident data. And after describing very briefly our kind of data collection methodology, we will offer some major findings on the direct humanitarian and indirect humanitarian consequences from AVMs, including here and there a glimpse of some preliminary observations from 2018. And towards the end of the presentation, I will also try to draw a link between our data and a bit more development-focused discourse, probably also a bit in advance already of the discussions this afternoon. But I think for the first block, I will hand over to SIPRI.
Hello everyone. Let me continue with the research methodology that we have been conducted since 2015. So in order to strengthen the evidence on humanitarian consequences of AVM, we collect data through mainly two methods. Firstly, we gather data from field office provided by states and mine action authorities, as well as mine action and humanitarian organizations. Last year, for the latest reports, total 45 organizations contributed to our data collection. And secondly, we also gather data from media articles through media review in 8 languages in order to complement the field reports. And they are retained based on a set of criteria which are indicative of an AVM-related incidents. Since field reports generally provide more accurate and also disaggregated information, much more than media report, we classified in our database on their reliability. For example, last year, 70% of data gathered from field reports, whereas 30% from media articles. To assess the relevance and also accuracy of the press articles, we also consult with the mine action organizations and also national authorities for some cases. Despite all these different approaches to our data collection, we are also aware of our limitation of such exercise. For instance, we acknowledge that AVM impact data remain incomplete. Also, especially their long-term consistency and also reliability continue to be very challenging. To complete this methodology, the research also benefits from different organizations such as Landmine Monitor. Data collection is particularly challenging that we found, especially in the conflict situations, partly due to the difficulty to access all affected areas. As a result, actual casualty number figures are likely to be higher than we are presented in the reports. So here, let me give some summary of key findings between 2015 and 2017. So data collected through this methodology provides very interesting insights on the extent and demographics and also geography of the direct humanitarian impact of AVMs. So between 2015 and 2017, total of 528 incidents are recorded related to or suspected to be related to AVMs in 34 states and territories. And these 528 incidents caused 1,508 casualties, of which more than half of were civilians. On average, an incident caused 2.86 casualties. This graph shows changes in the number of incidents and also casualties over time. So this orange indicates the number of casualties over time, and also this green indicates the incidents between 2016 and 2018. But please note that these 2018 numbers are still tentative. This casualty heat map provides a picture on the geography and frequency of the casualties. These include states with incidents but without incidents, such as DR Congo. So you can see the details in the legend here, but the darker red are indicating more casualties, whereas the lighter color indicates less casualties. So the states with the darker red are those countries with a higher recorded casualties. And you can see these three countries, Ukraine and Mali and Pakistan, are concentrating the incidents. So Ukraine has been the state with the most recorded incidents and casualties for 3 years in a row. In addition to these three countries, we also found that Syria and Yemen have also featured as top 5 countries during this period. And these five states account 67% of global 3-year total. Although, we are not going to in the details in this presentation, but you can also find our report. But our initial findings include that states with a higher number of AVM casualties in 2017 tend to have had their last conflict more recently, or there are still being active conflicts. So this slide shows different categories of casualties between 2015 and 2017. So if we disaggregate casualty data, we see that civilians are the category most affected by AVM incidents. And there are followed by national security forces that comprise, for instance, national military personnel, police, or border guards. So total 56% of the casualties on average were civilians, including humanitarian personnel, where disaggregata were available as opposed to non-civilian casualties, which account for 44%. Although this analysis featured only in 2016 report, we also found out that the significant impact on civilians becomes particularly striking in post-conflict phase. So in 2016, while civilians represented 40% of casualties in the conflict settings, 87% of the casualties in post-conflict settings were civilians. So this figure shows gender analysis of the casualties. It shows that nearly all casualties, 91% of casualties were male. This might be expected due to traditionally high male representation among security forces, peacekeepers, or other combatants. This proportion of male casualties decreased slightly when considering only civilian casualties, which counts 87.5%. This graph similarly shows age analysis of casualties. So 86% of casualties where age was known were adults, whereas children who are under 18 years old made up 14%. So in addition to all these different analyses, which also you can find in our reports, our project also aims to geo-reference the incidents that we collect to the greatest extent possible. So access to such geographic information is available in the interactive maps in GICHD website here. So these maps are designed in a manner that audience can dive into the maps, see the different recorded incidents, and related information. In the interactive platform, you can zoom in to see casualty breakdown of the country, zoom in also to see...
So actually a huge impact as well then on that side. Now, incident and casualty patterns also provide kind of a natural pathway to kind of an analysis of impact also in more development terms. And I try to illustrate this with Cambodia. Perhaps, again, as I said, in anticipation of what will be discussed this afternoon, or as a complement, hopefully. So when taking a longer-term perspective on anti-vehicle mine casualties in Cambodia, and when comparing those casualty numbers with those from anti-personnel mines, it can be seen that over the years, the impact of anti-vehicle mines in terms of casualties actually has grown over the years. Indeed, for many years after the conflict, the number of anti-personnel mine casualties was significant, and it was significantly higher than that of anti-vehicle mines. And this can also be seen when we look at the ratio between anti-personnel and anti-vehicle mine casualties. And this is illustrated in the yellow dotted lines. So a ratio of 1 would mean as many anti-vehicle mine casualties as anti-personnel mine casualties. Right? Now, this trend has changed to a certain extent in recent years. In 2010, for the first time, anti-vehicle mine casualties surpassed for the first time those from anti-personnel mines. And subsequently, in 4 out of the 8 following years, anti-vehicle mine casualties again surpassed or equaled anti-personnel mine casualties, which I think can again be seen here with the yellow dotted line. So there has been actually kind of a bit a change. To be seen whether this significant drop in 2017 was kind of a bit an outlier, or whether this could indicate a new trend that we still have to kind of understand and analyze. But in fact, the negative impact of AVMs has proven to have a significant impact precisely when a country is progressing towards post-conflict recovery and development, and also then to affect livelihoods long after conflict has ended. And as also Michael mentioned, so due to higher pressure thresholds, AVMs are unlikely to be triggered by people on foot or non-mechanized farming practices. So when displaced communities return home after conflict or they are resettled to an area that was mined during the conflict, any threats from anti-personnel mines or other explosive remnants of war become apparent much more quickly, in a sense, also in terms of casualties. On the other hand, AVMs are more likely to go unnoticed at that stage, and they pose actually a latent threat to future development efforts. And I think this is what has happened in Cambodia precisely. And now the adoption of more efficient, modern, and hence mechanized farming practices, the use of tractors, for example, expose farmers actually to heightened risk of triggering these dormant weapons. And this pattern becomes clearly apparent as well when you look at our casualty data. So from 2015 to 18, so including 18, so over a 4-year period, we recorded 47 anti-vehicle mine-related incidents in Cambodia. Out of these 47, 40 were related to a vehicle. And out of these 40, mechanical farming activities triggered the incident in 35 instances. So almost 9 in 10 instances, agricultural vehicle actually was the cause of the accident. And I think this is a striking number. But I would not keep this analysis at this stage, but also include kind of the seasonal fluctuation of AVM casualties that we have observed in Cambodia over the last years. And I think this testifies, I think, to the same phenomenon, if so to speak. While incidents peaked actually in May and June, there were none or hardly any anti-vehicle mine incidents in the period from July to September, which can be mainly attributed to the end of the planting season. So the planting season requires, the use of tractors and ploughing, for example, and conversely, less mechanized work is actually undertaken during the growing season, which generally starts in July. I was focusing a lot on agriculture now as well, but I think more generally, one can posit that construction with heavy machinery, an increase, for example, as well in vehicles per capita in a region, or the development projects for infrastructure are kind of a sign of a country's way towards development. But these signs are also kind of an eventual trigger that could reveal the presence of anti-vehicle mines. And as a result, AVM contamination can actually and does hamper development efforts and deter investments in such projects. Afghanistan, just to close on that, is a good case in point. According to the National Mine Action Center, so the Directorate for Mine Action Coordination in Afghanistan, out of the 260 development projects at the end of 2017, 37 were actually affected by anti-vehicle mines, mainly related to road infrastructure development, railway, or extractive industries. But I will not go further into that, but also mindful of the time, maybe wrap up with kind of 3 main elements that we would like to share at the end. I think first, available evidence clearly demonstrates the impact of AVMs on lives and also their effects on the protection of civilians, or a lack of protection, of course. And there is also, I think, a growing body of evidence that demonstrate the impact on livelihoods long after, and on development long after conflict has actually ended. Second, while the humanitarian impact of AVMs has decreased in some countries over the years, observable, for example, in a drop in casualty numbers, like in Cambodia, I think it's key as well to not to limit our understanding of impact to humanitarian terms only. It's an important consideration, but I think we should also consider the longer-term effects of anti-vehicle mines in terms of socio-economic development. And in that sense, I think it's key to understand as well on how the many ramifications of AVM contamination on communities, on countries itself over the longer term period. And also, it's important to equip ourselves with more evidence to be able to demonstrate the catalytic effects or function of AVM clearance for development. I think that's important as well. And third, the last point, I think current findings support also the need for continued political discussions on the topic to really find further means, let's say, to mitigate AVM impact. And research has an important part to play in that regard in order to ensure that these political discussions and eventually decisions are actually grounded in evidence. And the ACRA project clearly fills an important gap in that light. And at SIPRI and GICHD, we are also thrilled to contribute to that effort by partnering with the African Leadership Center at King's to conduct also an impact assessment of anti-vehicle mines in Angola. So I think on that I would like to close and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Are there questions? Yes.
Thanks. Thank you very much. It was a very interesting presentation. Hector Guerra, ICBL CMC. Is there, my question is about improvised anti-vehicle mines. I understand that there might be some production and use in Afghanistan. I don't know if there is any evidence to substance here. This, and also something I've heard about some of these models is that they are improvised, and as such, they might not necessarily be up to standard when it comes to what an IVM should work like in terms of what weight, and that they can withstand before detonating, and that some of them perhaps have been detonating when civilians step on them, that in fact they turn into anti-personal landmines.
Yeah.
Do you have any comments on that? Thank you.
Well, yeah, no, I would have comments, and it's really an interesting debate, and without going into too much technicalities, but I think that's certainly also what we witness now in current conflicts, the use more of improvised devices, and especially if you now mention Afghanistan, I think we are talking about perhaps 30 casualties from industry-made anti-vehicle mines per year. There are a few as well from anti-personal mines, but then we have to contrast that with the number of improvised devices and the casualties, and there we are in the 900,000 or so, depending on the year. So there you also already see the scale of the threat. And typically for Afghanistan, the information that we get from the National Mine Action Center is that because of the threshold that is required, let's say, to activate these devices, they are considered as anti-personal mines, right? And that's kind of something we follow. If they believe these devices are improvised anti-personal mines, then we do not challenge that. And in general, I think for our project, we definitely follow the definitions set out in the treaties. So if a device is designed to be detonated by the proximity contact of a person, then it's an anti-personal mine. In contrast, the de facto definition of an anti-vehicle mine, even though it's not a legal definition, is that if a device is designed to be detonated by the vehicle, then it's an anti-vehicle mine. Now, perhaps I could also refer to Yemen, where other research organizations such as Conflict Armament Research, they have looked also into the devices that are used and found in Yemen, and they found also, apart from anti-personal mines, including improvised anti-personal mines, also a number of improvised anti-vehicle mines with a threshold following their own criteria that would actually amount to a vehicle. So in that sense, in certain circumstances, we could assume that certain anti-vehicle mines could also be of an improvised nature, if that responds to your question.
Among the categories that you mentioned before of casualties, I haven't seen anything about humanitarian demining operators. Is there anything about those ones? Have there actually been casualties of operators, or have they been included inside other categories?
So we disaggregated data. Yes, so here, when disaggregated categories of casualties, we tend to include humanitarian personnel into civilian casualties. So these figures include humanitarian mine action personnel or operators. But when we disaggregate data with casualty of vehicle, we tend to disaggregate into humanitarian vehicle and civilian vehicle separately. I mean, we don't really show here in this presentation, but you can find in the report that you can see humanitarian vehicles separately from civilian vehicles.
Mm. Yeah. No, and indeed there are humanitarian casualties as well almost every year, be it humanitarian organizations, as I mentioned before, delivering assistance, or also then mine clearance operators then being kind of
Thanks. Not to disagree with what you're saying, but just a couple of things I think are relevant here. First one with anti-vehicle mines is perception. You know, I think you're actually getting far more damage done in both a humanitarian and an inhibitor from the perception of the presence of an anti-vehicle mine than the actual reality of it. Because if you're denying 2,000 kilometres of road, it doesn't matter whether there's 100 or 200 mines on it, it's still there. So when you clear it, it's been the perception of the problem rather than the reality of the problem is often the case. Second, that I think is difficult for you to capture is the consequence of anti-vehicle mines, because of, especially when you're talking in the context of casualties. You know, if you have a farmer on a tractor, goes bang, it's one casualty, the same as an anti-personnel mine. If you've got a bus with 30 people in it, or a pickup truck with 25 people in the back, your casualty data is going to get skewed every instant. So you only need 4 of those to get 150 casualties, which is a lot different to mine, AP mines. And then the final one that I think is quite difficult for you to capture in the context of Africa in particular is the context. You mentioned Mali, you mentioned Somalia, you mentioned Nigeria. Those are 3 very, very different environments between 3 situations where you're already war fighting, and it's very, very different to Angola or South Sudan or what's happening in Darfur. And I think to try and compare apples and pears, or pears and oranges, you're not going to get the same thing. I mean, there's an incident 2 weeks ago where in a 14-kilometre stretch of road, a convoy got hit 8 times by pressure plate IEDs in Somalia. Your data doesn't reflect that. Yeah. And that's warfighting. But that convoy was hit because it was a convoy. If it hadn't gone down the road, those pressure plate IEDs wouldn't have been planted. So you've got another consequence there is, if you put in military forces on the ground to take ground, the insurgent groups are going to attack them using the device that works, which is a pressure plate IED. So you're not comparing apples and oranges here.
Okay. Any comments on this?
No, I think comments of agreement. Yeah, I think the perception that's probably sometimes even more important than the real threat in that sense. But I think this is also then probably more in the qualitative side of things. Also, when we look at the impact, I think this should be an important factor as well. And of course, I think in terms of the environments, every environment is different, and you mentioned a few of them. Typically also with Somalia, we also rely a bit on then the assessment of the actors present on the ground, whether for them they categorize it as an anti-vehicle mine. And there is also some differences as well, sometimes across programs, to be very honest as well, on how we categorize certain things. even though there is now an effort as well to get more clarity on what we are talking about, and more standardizing as well on how we enter our data in the databases. But I think this is definitely an issue we still have to fine-tune. I think it's an exercise that we have been doing now for several years, and also trying to improve constantly, acknowledging also a bit the caveats that we mentioned before. And one of these caveats is also that some comparison might be less useful than others, and especially also when looking at several really high casualty incidents. I think perhaps a more meaningful number would be the number of casualties per incident across the board, and not singling out one or two high casualty, which actually then a bit distort the overall data. So, but I think there is still kind of room for making our data more meaningful in that sense.
Thank you very much. I think we can stop here for the short coffee break. Thanks very much to the speakers.